Thank you. Well, again, good evening, again, to the City Council and to the members of the public watching from home tonight and who may watch this later. Yeah, I'm honored to present the proposed FY22 budget, which, if it isn't now, will be live shortly, sometime this evening at somervillema.gov/FY22 budget. This is also, for me, is my last budget I'll be presenting as mayor and my 18 years and last in my 26 years of service, having been a full member of the Board of Aldermen. So I get to reminisce a little bit, but thank you again, Mr. President, have the honor to present to you. When we begin the FY22 budget season, certainly under markedly different circumstances than last year. It's been a long, grueling, traumatic 14 plus months as a community, as a society, as an administration, as elected bodies dealing with COVID. It was only less than 12 months ago that when I presented the proposed FY21 budget. But to many of us, it feels like several years. I think we can agree on that. Passed since those early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still upon us. And I want to thank all of you on the council and everyone in the public for the work you've done to step up, help out our community, those in need, those most vulnerable, those suffering. It's been a true team effort, and it's important as it's difficult to measure and take stock of what we've lost. We know we lost 86 souls. Businesses were disrupted and some closed. People's lives certainly turned upside down, and we suffered through, again, an immeasurable amount of emotional stress and strain because of the trauma, isolation, uncertainty in the situation. Last year, we were certainly engulfed in uncertainty, more so than now, and uncertainty about the virus, the health and safety of our community, our residents and businesses, and economic security, and the impacts really of COVID on our city government and administration. So what I hope this slide will illustrate, this is from my budget presentation last year, really reflects that uncertainty. When we had proposed and developed the FY21 budget in the spring of 2020, as we recall, if you could recall, many sectors of the economy and city operations were still largely shut down, and we had very little knowledge about the course of the virus that would take in the coming months, and when or how we would even reopen and how that would proceed. So we made a very smart and collective decision to projected significant revenue losses, as everyone was projecting, both the public and private sector, across the economic spectrum. Thankfully, we would learn later that state aid would be level funded, and that many of our other revenue sources would not be as negatively impacted as we projected. But not knowing any of this in June of 2020, you recall we had the budget conservatively. So we made some tough but necessary decisions to reduce ordinary maintenance budgets in nearly every department. We put on hold, as you recall, important projects and programs and services. We put a halt to all new investments. We froze hiring for vacant positions and eliminated annual salary increases for non-union staff. And we made the decision collectively to use over $5 million in free cash to fund the budget. And that was up from just over $1 million in fiscal year 2020. I'm grateful, I'm sure you all are, that our financial outlook looks significantly better today. Certainly as I present to you the FY22 budget. Thanks to the resilience and the hard work of staff, elected officials, and residents, the council's support of our aggressive agenda to support our community, a welcome change in leadership in Washington at the national level, President Biden's administration, Congress, and COVID-19 vaccines. We have weathered the municipal public financial storm and have come out stronger on the other end. Overall, we're projecting a nearly 9% increase in revenue in this FY22 budget compared to the final FY21 budget. Now, this overwhelmingly positive financial outlook, it's not surprising. Not when we consider our collective record, all of us, as an administration, as chief executive of that administration, as elected bodies, the legislative level, boards of aldermen and council of the community, our record over strong financial management over the past almost 20 years, 18 years. New growth, both commercial and residential, which has climbed steadily since 2010, took off in FY19 and 20 and 21, you recall. We had $10.3 million in new growth in FY21, 68% of which came from commercial growth. That's the largest percentage in recent history, and that is the result of a deliberate approach by all of us to reframing that paradigm, shifting the tax base ratio for the commercial sector, and bringing the revenues we envision in some vision to deliver the services this community deserves. And this trend, it's set to continue with 11 major commercial developments in the pipeline, 4 of which are already under construction, and 10, which include a lab or biotech component. And you had the opportunity, if not, I invite you to read the recent, just a few days ago, Boston Business Journal article talking about the expansion of the life sciences biotech sector into Somerville, which really has been a saving grace for that sector. This was done with our community vision, not by anyone else, and it's paying off. And with the Green Line extension expected to come online by the end of this calendar year, we anticipate that new growth to continue along that corridor. Even better, I'm optimistic, very optimistic we will get our Green Line extension contribution money we borrowed back. It's not final, but we are getting close in our conversations, negotiations. We hope to hear soon, which you can imagine, envision, provide us even more financial flexibility as we move forward. Free cash, which is really a confusing term. There's nothing free about cash. But free cash is really a reflection of strong financial management and budgetary oversight. Free cash also provides us flexibility and resiliency, especially in unexpected, difficult financial circumstances. Free cash has also been growing steadily for the last decade. Again, the importance of free cash, I think you would agree, was underscored over the last year when we used this funding source to support community economic recovery. And we were prepared to use $5 million, as I mentioned a bit, to fund the FY21 budget in order to avoid layoffs and would have been painful service cuts to the community. As free cash has grown, the other important parallel is our reliance on it as a funding source to offset structural deficits in the operating budget has decreased. We were fortunate that the financial circumstances in FY21 were not nearly as dire as we and others are projecting at budget time, and that this council passed a final budget. This is important. This council passed a final budget in December that for the first time had no structural deficit and required no free cash as a funding source. And I don't say that lightly, the importance of that. That same is true for the project proposal before you tonight in FY22. For the second year in a row, we will not use free cash to fund the operating budget. Reserves are also, as you all well know, the public understand, essential to our financial flexibility and resiliency. And we have grown our stabilization fund to over $44 million. That is also historic. Reserves have also grown relative to the operating budget and are now over 15%. This is, by any outside observing expert, a critical indicator of financial health. As I and I want to thank you all for, all the success is the product of everyone's collective will to set the highest standards in policy as fiduciary stewards of the taxpayers' dollars and use them wisely. And it's paying off. But I have to share one story. And as I spoke to Councillor White as he and I took office just 2 years apart in the 90s. One, how certainly the complexity, I'll talk about that, and the level of budgetary investment and growth has grown exponentially, all for the good. But really, to think about where we were in my, as alderman and our first budget to receive, but for me personally, in proposing my first budget as mayor, and I can't help but reflect on my first budget season as mayor in fiscal year 2005, for FY05, and that was in obviously June of 2004. Back then, we had a multi-million-dollar structural deficit and less than $200,000 in reserves. We had a water and sewer enterprise fund by name only that then Alderman White and myself worked together to form and propose in the Board of Aldermen that we operationalized together with the Board of Aldermen. This council has carried that forward. And little did I know that a massive recession, any of us, was only a few years away in 2008, 2010. For me personally, it's one of my greatest achievements in my time as mayor that we leave the next administration, next mayor, whoever she or he may be, better financial circumstances that we inherited. But for all of us as legislators, having served on the Board of Aldermen, and I understand the role of the watchdog of the city's treasury, and all of us together, these were done collectively to adopt the policies we adopted, to make the investments in the infrastructure, I'll touch upon that, to put a deliberate intention and focus and approach to growing the revenues, specifically new commercial revenue that has allowed us and put us in this important and advantageous position. So I'll be giving you all a shout out, but I do want to give a shout out to my many of you have served with, but I served almost the same amount of time with then Alderman White. And that we had a little laugh today. It was a lot different back then as we were literally scratching points or begging for points to scratch together to hopefully come up with something net positive. Our strong financial management that we've all had a role to play in has led to consistent improvements in our bond rating. Just to pull out some comments from our most recent bond rating evaluation, Standard & Poor's assigned its AA+ long-term rating to Somerville, specifically citing our very strong economy, very strong management, strong budgetary performance, very strong budgetary flexibility, very strong liquidity, very weak debt and contingent liability profile, and strong institutional framework, which I'll speak about this in a little bit about your collective collaboration over the years with this administration. And keeping with our bond rating increases, as we will know, I want the public to clarify for the public, our cost of borrowing has gone down, even as we have borrowed more. So we, if you don't know, we went out to borrow just 2 weeks ago and achieved, and Alderman Council White and I were having another laugh about this. We achieved a remarkable 0.12%, 0.12% interest rate on our short-term bond anticipation. You know, it's in 1.97% interest rate. That's under 2 in our long-term bonds. So these remarkably low interest rates, as you can imagine, and so the public understands, will allow us to continue our aggressive efforts to tackle legacy infrastructure needs for less money, less cost. The taxpayers of Somerville have also directly benefited from our strong financial management and the bond rating. In October of 2020, if you recall, we borrowed a little over 130.3 million to be exact, for the new high school. The amount publicized in 2016 that would be under the debt exclusion. Now, the winning bid for that sale came in with an interest rate of just over 2.03% and an overall cost of over 30 years of approximately $177 million. So to put things in perspective, several years ago, many years ago, about 10, I believe, on the night the then Board of Aldermen voted to place the high school debt exclusion question on the ballot, we presented as an administration to the Board of Aldermen a scenario that assumed a 5% interest rate that produced approximately a $250 million overall cost. Compared to that scenario, the actual sale has saved this community, particularly the Somerville taxpayers, nearly $73 million. $73 million over the next 30 years. The fiscal year 22 budget presented to you tonight boldly embraces this positive financial outlook. It makes up for the new ground we lost in FY21 and commits critical new resources that I will describe in the following slides. Before you is an appropriation request of approximately $270 million, a 9% increase over FY21, a 6.7% increase excluding debt service on the high school. The budget is $350,000 below the levy limit and includes only minor changes in fees and fines that will be discussed and presented to you on Monday. The FY22 budget includes a slate of new investments that in short aim to, one, set the city up for long-term operational success, and two, build towards a more equitable Somerville. This evening, I will provide a high-level overview of many of these investments. Department heads are not only ready and willing, but very eager and excited to engage with the council in a robust and detailed discussion of each of these proposals in their scheduled budget meetings. The work of the Somerville City government, as we all know, has grown steadily, perhaps more accurately, exponentially, in volume and complexity in recent years, reflecting the changing evolution and complexity of a community. And it shows no sign of slowing down. We continue also to face crises with no easy answers, whether they be housing affordability, how do we take on climate change, systemic and racial injustice, and the pandemic highlighted vulnerabilities and inequities that we must, together, react boldly and deliberately on to address now. At the same time, and I know you hear this, our residents are rightfully demanding more. They expect and they deserve modern, efficient services and resources. We have done the best we can, all of us, with the resources available to meet those expectations. Without an infusion of resources, however, resources specifically to fill critical capacity gaps and to continue modernizing our government or investing in strong financial management or addressing legacy infrastructure needs and investing in our staff, we absolutely risk falling short of those expectations. If the next mayor, administration, city council is to be able to carry on the legacy of Somerville being the best run city in the Commonwealth, something we should all be proud of, that title or that accolade, we must continue to invest in this organization's ability and capacity to meet that challenge. I need to pause here once again and just say thank you to the City Council for the role you have played in supporting the investments we have made together in this organization and actually leading and advocating for new investments. It's more than appreciated. It's had an impact, a positive impact, not just in the staff and administration, but in the community. It has been an honor really to partner with you and your predecessors to grow this organization over time thoughtfully and strategically. I know that this year, like every year, you will execute your duties responsibly and effectively, and you will give each of our requests careful consideration and continue, as I expect you to push us to do better for the residents of Somerville. Our first step is to build back better. So as I discussed at the beginning of this presentation, we were faced with potentially devastating revenue shortfalls while developing the FY21 budget. And in response, we reduced, again, non-critical OM spending, shifted costs to other funding sources where appropriate, eliminated salary increases for non-union staff, and halted nearly all new investments. So this year's budget proposal recommits general fund resources to critical services and initiatives that were put on hold or perhaps were shifted to other funding sources in FY21, ensuring predictability and funding in service provision. It also reflects the 2% salary increase for non-union staff approved earlier this year. Once again, thank you to the City Council for its quick and unanimous support and approval of that request. And finally, it reflects the mid-year staffing and resource requests approved by the City Council in March and April. As our financial outlook steadily improved through FY21, it became readily apparent that an investment in 9 urgently needed positions was essential in order to meet growing community expectations, as well as keep critical city business moving forward. So once again, thank you to the council for your advocacy, for your leadership, and your support of those requests. As the volume and complexity of the city's work grows, critical capacity gaps that must be filled have, and I know you all know this, become glaringly obvious. So, for example, we plan to address with a larger, more sophisticated new West Branch Library. We obviously recognize the need to hire 2 additional librarians to ensure they're properly staffed and operated. With the new zoning ordinance and increasing development pressures across the city, we need a deputy director of planning and zoning to focus on optimizing our land use policies. And with the annual city budget growing steadily in size and complexity, as Council White and I reminisced, and many of you know very well, we need a new procurement manager to ensure that, really ensure that departments can smoothly and efficiently obtain the resources they need just to conduct their ordinary and everyday business and responsibilities. Somerville has long been a leader in modernizing government. I'm proud that we've all done this together. I'm proud that we're referred to as the best run city in the Commonwealth well before many of these changes took place, but because of our approach, I am proud that we, a few years back, were seen as one of the 15 most influential cities in the United States. A city, the only small-sized city in that list, that other cities, including some of the major cities in this country, look to it in terms of how you deliver highly effective, high-standard operations and administration and being most innovative. But without new investments, we do risk falling behind. So, for example, a digital innovation officer in Somerset will help departments develop data tracking systems and digitize paper-based processes, as well as manage the city's open data program. A critical effort to convert to a citywide digital time and attendance system will increase reporting efficiency and accuracy and vastly improve oversight and analysis capabilities. And thanks again to mid-year city council approval, a robust process is underway to modernize our charter. The Charter Review Committee, formed by myself and President McLaughlin, has developed a budget that truly seeks to engage the community as deeply and as far as possible in this process and ensure the best possible outcome for Somerville residents. Thanks again to this council support, we have made significant and growing investments to address legacy infrastructure needs in Somerville. I had the honor of representing all of us in a virtual meeting of, sponsored by Yale University, in terms with other municipal CEOs from around the country, speaking to how infrastructure, focus on those infrastructure investments has led to a positive impact in addressing many of the inequities in our community and other communities. Now, while most of these expenses are driven by the capital plan, critical investments in the operating budget, as we are well aware, are always needed as well. So, for example, a new asset management program in the infrastructure asset management division will work with operational departments like the DPW and water and sewer to adopt a data-driven asset management approach that incorporates both, work order tracking and capital planning components. The splitting of buildings and grounds and DPW into 2 separate divisions will allow for a better management and really provide the department the capacity it really needs to shift towards being even more proactive. And expanding the Parks Tree Health and Young Tree Training programs and PSUF will continue and just double down on the city's efforts to protect and grow our urban forest and tree canopy. But to continue the strong financial management that has yielded such impressive dividends for this city, we really need to continue investing in department level and citywide financial management as well. So, for example, finance and administration directors in the Inspectional Services Division and for the police and fire departments will streamline processes and improve internal controls and increase financial accountability. Recognizing the growth in size and complexity of the city's operating capital budgets, the creation of a budget division within the finance department will improve fiscal transparency and reporting, budget development and management, and capital planning. And while the budget process proposes investments in critically needed new positions, and I know you know this, and again, thank you for all your support, we just can't forget about the current staff. And I will tell you, the critical challenge for us as an administration committee moving forward is continue to attract, not just to attract talented, diverse candidates who have a passion for curiosity, a willingness to be abnormal, who are driving the transformative change you've seen here along with the community and all of us over the past 2 decades. Every time someone who's so talented, part of the team here, moves on to another place, I'm always proud. And there's a saying that if you're not plucking your people, it means you don't have talent. This budget reflects, again, these individuals have kept this city running despite capacity gaps. And this budget reflects 2 new collective bargaining agreements for SPEA, fire alarm, actually 3, and E911. It proposes a 4% increase for non-union staff. Many, as you know, whom took on additional roles and duties over the last year just to keep normal city operations running while also standing up a separate operation, the city's COVID-19 emergency response. Their work was selfless, unheralded, and inspirational. This budget reclassifies several non-union positions whose job responsibilities have permanently changed since the last salary study. And it proposes a new comprehensive non-union salary study that really re-examines, as we should always do, to make sure we're staying ahead of the market, but re-examines the classifications and brings salaries in line with the marketplace. So that's never a variable that puts us on the short end of the recruiting and retention scale. Finally, this budget makes a significant investment to prepare this administration, this organization, this community for its first change in leadership in 18 years. I can tell you I have pretty relevant experience there since the last transition involved my administration. And it took over a period of roughly maybe 45 days. I promise you, if we don't put our effort into this, the next administration, its council, will have a very difficult time. I understand my role in this, and I want to make you proud in this effort and put all I have along with you to make sure the next administration, next mayor, whoever she or he may be, is even more successful than what we built together in the last 20 years. You've heard me say this multiple times in this presentation. I'll say it again and again, but the scale and complexity of the work we do today has changed. If it's changed 10 times in the last 30 years, it's been 9 in the last 18. I promise you that. Certainly, it's changed significantly compared to when I took office in 2004, and this trend shows no signs of slowing down. It really would be irresponsible not to invest the resources today in order to set up the next mayor, their administration, and the next set of elected officials for success. So I'll say the start, this could evolve, but the start, we know at a minimum this budget should and does propose 2 full-time positions for the incoming mayor for the 9 weeks at the end of the calendar year, so sometime between the final election and calendar year, a robust transition project to thoroughly document the work, the lessons learned, provide the context, information, analysis, and the trajectory of this organization. There should not be an effort where we put binders or papers over the counter, but to engage the community, the bodies of government, the next administration, to provide the greatest opportunity for a smooth and accelerated transition, seamless as well. It provides for training for newly elected officials, city council and school committee, and newly hired department heads. It relaunches, which was a very successful pilot program, the Somerville Academy for Innovative Leadership SAIL, which really, and to embed this in the community, and we'll go into details as we move forward, the teaching of what adaptive leadership is. So many of our challenges are not technical, where we know we can just provide a very straightforward linear solution, but will require the cultivation and aligning of allies and stakeholders at every level of this community, whether you're elected official, volunteer, activist, just live in the community, love it, whoever, to take on the challenges of today and the unknown challenges of tomorrow. We need to commit ourselves to being not just a learning organization, but a learning community. But this is a program designed to broaden and deepen the pool of Somerville residents who dedicate themselves again to adaptive leadership and accomplishing shared community goals with a sense of purpose and vision and passion. All of the investments I have just spoke to about or discussed are critical to ensuring, again, the administration, this organization can keep pace with the growing scale and complexity of the city's work and with our residents' expectation. I think you'll agree with me in this statement. I'm sure you will. But this organization, this city, will not succeed if racial and social inequities persist in our community. And I hope we learn a lot from the last 14 months as a society, not just as government, but we know this, that the pandemic has put a glaring spotlight on the inequities of the whole system. I know all of you, as representatives of this community, know that all too well, and are strong champions and advocates of that. In the FY21 budget, thanks to the support of this council, we made together a serious commitment to advancing racial and social justice and advancing equity in spite of the difficult financial circumstances and really just uncertainties we faced at the time. In addition to new investments in housing and the Office of Housing Stability, Health and Human Services, and the public schools, if you recall, to remind the public, the FY21 budget created a new position, the Director of Racial and Social Justice. We embarked on an inclusive community-based hiring process, again, including members of the community, as well as representation, City Council, the School Committee, the Mayor's Office, and a recommendation was made to me, which I supported, and we hired Ms. Denise Molina-Capers to fill this position in March. And she's already had a profound impact on this organization and some of the community. In the FY22 budget, I submit we are doubling down on our commitment to advancing racial and social justice. First and foremost, what we are proposing is to formally launch the Racial and Social Justice Office under Director Denise Molina-Capers. Denise has spent the last few months developing the plan for the RSJ Office shown or illustrated on this slide, drawing on the priorities for the office established in the FY21 budget process, as well as conversations with staff and the organization that currently work on racial and social justice issues, initial conversations with community members, as well as her own deep perspective, expertise in advancing equity practice and her experience leading and advising nonprofit organizations. I know Denise is excited to discuss this proposal in more depth with all of you in the council and the community on Monday evening. But our work obviously doesn't stop there. We also propose an additional $700,000 of investments in other departments and divisions in the organization that support citywide equity work, including, for example, launching the 2,000 home programs, which is the bold next iteration of the 100 homes program, expanding the Office of Housing Stability, creating a new position in the Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development, which is designed to integrate an equity focus in all of that department's work, creating a senior planner in economic development that is focused on support for women and minority-owned businesses, creating a community engagement specialist in the Office of Sustainability and Environment to support enhanced equity-focused projects on climate change resilience and underserved and vulnerable neighborhoods in our communities. Also creating a youth and family resource navigator and summer promise, which is focused on increasing equitable access to resources for families with young children. This budget, however, also proposes an additional full-time Spanish community engagement specialist in the Somerville Office of Immigrant Affairs, or SOIA. But no, I want to make this clear that I do intend to submit a mid-year request to the council for additional resources for SOIA once a new director is hired and has developed a full business plan, much like we've done for OHS and the RSJ Office, a full business plan for the office aimed at meeting the growing demand for the services offered by really to the community by incredible SOIA staff. This budget also proposes $1.6 million in new equity investments for our public schools, which you'll hear about from Superintendent Skipper and her team this evening. But I just want to make a particular note. The school department budget includes, because this has been a community goal, $500,000 in funding for free public transit access for our students. Really a remarkable investment that will not only improve access to education and job opportunities for our students, but also lays the groundwork for reaching our ultimate goal of making public transit access free for all Somerville residents, and also a critical step to achieving our Somerville climate forward goals. Now, although it's not part of the operating budget, the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, is an important part of tonight's discussion. Like other communities across the country, Somerville will receive an historic and enormous infusion of financial resources in the coming years as a result of ARPA. I say historic is in my memory. I don't know anyone else who has memory. Never seen such a direct investment, direct to municipalities that we've advocated across many fronts, whether it be transportation, whether it was during the Great Recession. This is a monumental time we need to deliver now. Thank you. The City Council has already accepted the first allotment of approximately $31 million in May. And this funding source represents, again, an incredible opportunity for every community, but certainly to ours, to invest in social, economic, and organizational recovery from COVID-19, to also further invest in a more equitable Somerville. We already have, obviously, some initial ideas for how to use the money. And these are long-standing issues of advocacy to bridge the divide of equity in the community, but whether it be bridging the digital divide, investing in childcare and early education, or providing additional housing assistance, supporting our businesses, and increasing our investments in arts and culture. But the historic scale which I submitted this funding source also presents a challenge. It is unique and historic, as I mentioned earlier, for the reasons I stated. The challenge is really how to responsibly spend this funding in a planful and community-driven way that optimizes the use of this incredible resource. I chaired the Metropolitan Mayors Coalition, which is the 15 communities in the inner core of Boston. I'm former head of the Mass Mayors Association twice. I'm the board of directors, National League of Cities, and from the beginning of COVID, along with Kim Driscoll from the Mayor of Salem, co-chaired a statewide coalition. I can tell you, we understand the historic meaning, the gravity of this moment to do this right, and we need to deliver. We have already begun the planning work for ARPA that will kick off with an expansive community process. And we will also intend to hire 2 positions using those funds to oversee this important resource, both the director and the specialist. And we're going to work collaboratively with this council to keep you informed up to date as this work progresses. This is important. Other communities are looking to us because, as I mentioned earlier, we have set the standard over the years and have been influential on how to approach these challenges. And we'll be sharing and collaborating with our regional partners and other municipalities on how to approach this and collect data and narrate the progress, because it's an opportunity we want to see repeat itself in the future for cities across the country who I'd submit have a better sense of how to manage their resources rather than coming through some other bureaucratic board at a state level. In the meantime, we are planning for what comes after ARPA and for how we sustain the critical investments in the community that ARPA will allow. Now, we have begun work on advancing reinvestment in our community, or ARC, which we will, as we advance plans, come to the City Council and ask for your assistance in that collaboration. That's, to describe it shortly, as I mentioned in my midterm, is an initiative that will leverage the incredible new growth, intends to leverage the incredible new growth of our city to invest in our human infrastructure, our residents and resident-owned businesses. We hope that our ARC will define a permanent financing structure so as to fund so many of the goals that advance social progress, that could advance social progress to levels we never imagined as quick in programs. Again, and also to make sure that on economic prosperity in Somerville crosses all and affects all, and it's a tide that lifts all boats. We made incredible investments over the years in our bricks and mortar infrastructure, but it's the human, the people infrastructure. I think you'd agree that we have an opportunity to really impact in a dramatic way. And if we can't invest there for a better life for people in this community, then the economy we want to achieve here will not be achievable. And I look forward to having that conversation with you. But just in ending this presentation, I thank you for the time and consideration you will give to this budget, and giving me tonight, but you will give to this budget and respect the role you play, but as well as the proposed potential give to the proposed investments in it. Thank you also, I want to say to all those here, they're all tuned in, to the department heads and staff of this incredible organization. You kept this city running under extraordinary, difficult circumstances over the past year. You helped sustain me in many difficult days, not to mention the impact you had on people's lives in our neighborhoods. You've established clear visions for how to improve service delivery in your departments, and you have honestly and openly requested the resources you need to make those visions a reality. I know you are all ready to and willing to engage in a robust discussion with the council on each of your proposals. I want to thank all of you and the staff, but once again, Mr. President, thank you to you, every member of the City Council, and the public. I'm here to answer any questions tonight. As I mentioned, the department heads and representatives of those departments are looking forward to detailed conversation. And the finance team and others are here to answer any other questions you may have in the budget. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. We do have a few comments already. I have Councilor Rossetti and then Councilor Ba.
Mr. President, thank you. Through you to His Honor the Mayor. Thank you very much for your years of service. This is not your last meeting with us, I know, but it is your last budget presentation. There's so much more I want to say, Joe, but I'm just going to leave it at thank you. Because I serve on the Finance Committee, I'm going to keep my questions limited as best as possible, but I want to make sure I understood some of your opening remarks. I thought the way I interpreted the slides or what was said was that for the current fiscal year we're in now, fiscal year 21, we did use $5 million of free cash because of the difficult situation we were in at this time last year and the unknowns. But on a further slide, it was suggested that there was no free cash used for fiscal year 21. So can you clarify if I misunderstood something?
No, I'm sorry, let me clarify. You're on the right track. The council, we collectively made the decision to invest an additional $5 million above the $1 million because initially the budget, we were looking at much worse projections than we realized. And we're happy to see as the fiscal year moved on that state aid was not cut. And by the time we got to December, the council passed a budget that we didn't have to use that free cash. We had a program, remember, we went slow like many other communities. We passed a very conservative budget, took some steps of austerity and decided to plug free cash rather than go through service cuts, layoffs. If you recall, we didn't lay anyone off here in the city. And but we did not have to utilize that free cash. So that's what happened.
Okay. So does Ed, he must have a sense of, Ed Bean, of where we are, what's the anticipated, I know one of the slides referenced the anticipated undesignated fund balance. I think it was about 17 mil, if I read the slide correctly, for the end of this year into next. But I'm wondering if that number represents funds that will be unencumbered and not spent at all. Do you have a projection, Mr. Bean?
Through you, through the mayor, through Councilor President McLaughlin, No, Councilor Rossetti, we won't be able to determine that number until the fiscal year closes. And it's a process that goes through the month of July where we close encumbrances with the various departments.
Right.
And our final revenue estimates. And that will determine what our undesignated fund balance is. But all signs are pointing to another budget surplus at the end of this fiscal year. So I'm expecting that we'll see very similar results. I'm sure that our free cash allocation will probably exceed 10 million again, but I'm reluctant to put a number on that until we actually close the fiscal year. So that's a process that goes through the end of July, and then we submit our balance sheet to the Department of Revenue, and it's the Department of Revenue determines what our free cash is after examining all of our numbers.
If I may continue, Mr. President, through you. Thank you, Mr. Bean. I understand all that. That might have been a good explanation for the public to understand. But one of the slides that the mayor just presented to us did represent a potential of 17 mil for fiscal year 22, the way I read that slide. So that's what your guesstimated projection is right now?
Through you, Mr. President, no, I think that slide is referring, free cash certification here in this fiscal year was 16.7 million. So I think that's what the slide is referring to, is this year's allocation. So we will be coming back to you before June 30th, and probably at the meeting on the 10th, we will be submitting appropriations to portion out the remaining free cash, various reserve accounts, and any remaining deficits, but they are few in this fiscal year, and putting it to reserves for important reserve situations such as salary and wage stabilization, the high school project, other projects. So we're determining what that amount's going to be, and we'll be putting forward appropriations to you at the meeting on June 10th.
Okay, thank you. Mr. President, may I ask one other question?
Please do.
Thank you, through you, to His Honor the Mayor. So the overall increase of this request of budget before us, if I remember correctly, is an increase of 9%. And my gut instinct when I saw that number was I cringed, and I'll tell you why. Because it's no surprise to you and your staff that, in our discussions with the water and sewer department over the new rates, it was a very difficult, quite a few meetings, and we ended up hopefully adjusting it by $1 million, although we haven't voted that yet. But even though we may be adjusting it by $1 million to help our taxpayers, that's still really not going to be a huge help to our taxpayers. And myself and some of my colleagues had concerns because, as Mr. Bean has reminded us, this will be the year this coming fall, late fall, when our homeowners get their real estate tax bills and they're going to notice the pain, the crunch, the financial crunch.
Everyone, please mute your microphones if you're not speaking, please.
Thank you. So what I think when I look at this budget presentation, we're going up 9%. The taxpayers are up because the tax bill go up based on our operation budget, based on however we vote this budget. And then it's going to go up because of the high school project. And we're also taking in 60, 70 million from the federal government. And I respect your plan of, getting together with Kim and others, of the mayor from Salem and others. But I also hoped that some of those federal monies could be used to help with our tax-paying citizens this year and next year as well, projections. Because people are still hurting from COVID, and hopefully next winter won't be a repeat of last winter that we all went through. But the federal government's been trying to help individually families by sending them a check every now and then. But my gut is telling me to agree to a 9% increase when we're going to be getting 60, 70, 80 million dollars from the federal government. And we're also going to be paying for the high school project more so this year, beginning this year, for the next 20 something years. That's where my mind is at. And I just wanted to let you all know. And I thank you, Mr. President, for letting me ramble.
Thank you, Councilor Rossetti. And please let the record show that Councilor Ballantyne is in attendance. Mr. Mayor, did you want to comment on that, or did you want to comment there, Councilor Rossetti? I guess no. I don't think I'm not sure if you're unmuted, Mr. Mayor.
No, I'm
you
okay. I
want-
didn't know if there was a request. I had to switch to a headset so you wouldn't get any feedback. I apologize. So.
Thank you. Did you want to comment there, Councilor Rossetti, or were you just making your statement?
Well, thank you, Mr. President, through you to the mayor. I really am just venting and letting you know what my gut reaction is to this sizable increase. And as I said, based on the federal monies coming in and the high school project and the water and sewer going up a good percentage, I'm not comfortable agreeing to a 9%. We have a lot of meetings ahead of us. I serve on finance, so we'll be diving deeper. That's my gut reaction to tonight's presentation.
Through you, Mr. President, I appreciate that. Respect the council's role. We are more than well prepared to, and the department has had to justify the investments. I'd submit, as I alluded to in the conversation, I'm fully aware about, impact on the tax rate, but I would say the hardest thing to tell people is they're not getting the services for the taxes they're paying. And, I think you all know this because you've all been advocating, leading the way, and I appreciate that. And that's been a big help to make sure we invest in the organization and back in the community. But we look forward to having that conversation and laying out all the data in terms of our position.
Thank you. We have Councilor Barr and then Councilor Ewan-Campen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to Mr. Mayor, good to see you. Thank you for the stimulating presentation. It was quite a lot of information. I don't have a question, just like Councilor Rossetti. I sit on finance, so I will take a deep dive when, it's before us. I have questions which I will not ask here because this is not the forum, but I want to take this opportunity to thank you and your staff for your leadership throughout the pandemic. I think a lot of what you guys do is kind of like a thankless job. And so I just want to express my gratitude for all the work that you've been doing. Thank you.
Well, Mr. President, if I may, thank you, Councilor Mba, and to the whole council. Whenever we needed a resource to community, you just didn't respond. You're actually all leading it. And I also know you're out there on the ground helping people with their needs. So appreciate everyone's leadership. We couldn't have done it without everyone, the council and the community, obviously, and the staff.
And through you, Mr. President, can I make one last comment?
Go ahead.
Sure, and I also appreciate your last but one slide. I really admire people who take pride in investing in their staff. So I just want to, commend you for the last two slides. That was, everything was kind of stimulating, but, the last but one slide piqued my interest. That, it's good to do everything to retain and keep great staff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Ewan-Campen.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Through you, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to all of your staff and the department heads. I know we're going to have plenty of time to ask a lot of questions, but I just have a really basic question that I don't think I understand around the $60 million that we're getting from the federal government. And I wonder if you or Mr. Bean can just talk a little bit about, is that money reflected in this year's budget, or is that money that the administration is still coming up with ideas on how to spend it? And also just, I'll say my own thought. I have clearly enormous respect for my colleague at large, Councilor Rossetti, who raised her concerns about this money. I'll just say from my standpoint, I want to see that money go out the door to improve the communities. And on the list of priorities I have, a very, very small tax decrease on people who own property in Somerville would not be high on my priority list. So I'm much more interested in this going out into projects that, people in Ward 3 have been hoping for and demanding for many years. And I just wonder if you could speak a little bit to how that money plays into this year's budget and future capital spending, et cetera. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. President, I'll start off, and Ed Bean only wants to chime in. No, it's not reflected in this budget. I did mention the 2 staff positions that will be paid out of those funds because we want to have the capacity to manage those monies appropriately, and we want to engage in a very robust community process. I did make mention of some priority areas, which aren't just mine. We know those just being part of this community. we are looking at some possibilities. What I will not support, I made it clear, is just back funding revenue losses to the city with ARPA. I want that out the door. I want an impact in people. And we want to be thoughtful about how we target and leverage this money against other funding to help individuals, families, those impacted the greatest, who got sick at the highest rates, who died at the highest rates, businesses. Again, one interesting statistic I was told was we lost 9 restaurants, if I have my statistics correct, during the pandemic so far, 2 which were already on the verge before that, but say 9 out of over 260, I believe. If I do my math at the top of my head, what's that, 4%? I'll leave it to you, Councilor Ewan Kim, because you're the scientist here. But that's relatively, that doesn't mean that industry is not stressed or strained. And there are, so we want to be targeted about how we use that money, but we have an impact. So I'm not going to support relying on ARPA money to help operations to lower people's tax rates. I want to deliver the services, and I respect the impact of taxpayers, but I would argue and submit there's not one position here, and I'd have probably more the council asked for, and they're not unjustified, that we shouldn't be doing. So there are none of those money used to create this budget. We refer to 2 positions that we paid out of ARPA. We're going to keep the council informed. I'll talk to you about the process and the consultation we're engaged in. Maybe I can speak to that, or Emily or Mike briefly, so the community understands how we're going to analyze, propose to use what will be multiple allotments. Right now it's about 31 each year for about 2 years, and we don't know where Middlesex County also gets allotment dispersed by some formula to municipalities. We may get a little boost from there as well, but I'm with you, we're going to get it out the door to the people that need it most.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or comments? And I have Councilor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I look forward to diving into this in depth with the members of the Finance Committee. I also look forward to the presentation from the school department shortly. But we did just receive this presentation about a half hour before the meeting, and the budget document. It's not really a PDF, but the budget document just went live a few minutes after this meeting started. I know that Mr. Mastroboni is working very hard to get the portal up in a usable fashion. So the entire council has a great deal of homework to do over the weekend, and I'm sure my colleagues will do our best to be prepared for Monday night. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? And we have Councilor Davis. Oh, you're muted.
That work? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, excellent. So thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that presentation. And absolutely want to just echo the acknowledgement to the staff. This past year, folks have really just gone out of their way to keep the city running, and I have such incredible respect and gratitude for every member of the staff for all the work that they all have done, and that bears repeating. So I want to make the point of saying that. 2 quick points and a question. I'm glad to see new positions. As you know, I have been among the many that have asked for and decried the lack of capacity or the challenges we have with capacity and enforcement of various things across the city. So I'm happy to see these new positions. At quick glance, they appear to be targeted in the right areas. Although I will certainly want to take a closer look. As Councilor Scott said, we really haven't had a chance to at any time to digest much of this prior to tonight. But we've got the rest of June to do that. But since I don't sit on the committee, the Finance Committee, and since you are here tonight, I wanted to ask one question, and I will acknowledge that this is based on information that was provided to me by someone that I haven't been able to look at the numbers, but so let me start by saying thank you for recognizing the need for and including in the budget full-time staff, certain full-time staff for the City Council. I expect that will be a great benefit to both the council, the public, and the administration. I think we saw through the part-time folks that we had over the past several months that we can make a lot of progress, work together with the administration, but also keep things off the dockets of folks within the administration, and that worked out well as we made a lot of progress towards advancing our understanding of where we are as a community in terms of having civilian oversight of the police department. And so thank you for recognizing that worked out well enough, and having a full-time position. I think some of the challenges we had there will by the nature of having full-time positions be addressed. So I'm really looking forward to filling those and keeping up with that important work and all the other work that those folks will help us do. And as we just deepen the collaboration between the council and the administration, because any good government needs both friction and collaboration in order for it to work well. And I think we just keep improving that. The one thing that I was, again, I haven't looked at the numbers, so please correct me if I'm off. But I had been under the understanding that part of the budget that we would see would be a modest amount of funding for the council to engage, to sort of have that on retainer, or at least sort of have at the ready an outside counsel if we had questions, if we had something that we wanted to ask the council that was not the solicitor's office, where there is a conflict between the executive branch and the legislative branch, which there is naturally in government. And I know that there is some money in there. I'm told that it appears to be allocated towards things that we already are paying for, and maybe isn't what we had been what the conversations had. So let me ask you: is there in this budget money for if the council, which under the ordinances that exist, has a question for an outside lawyer that we want to ask because we feel there's a conflict? Is there money in the budget for that? And if not, why not?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, can you hear me okay, Mr. President?
we can hear you.
Yeah, through you, we did put money for council. I haven't got it in front of me. I believe it's 25,000 to start, but I'll check on the number. There is money in there. We go through the details. So we did put that in. I just didn't put it in my presentation. I do want to recognize it. I was laughing. I'm sorry, I'm not away from asking me, but it's typically the council advocating. I want the staff to know this, for more staff and capacity, because there's empathy for the work the staff does. And me begging the council, will you hire yourself some staff, please? You need it. And I'm glad you got one. I'd submit you're going to need more in years to come. So I'm glad we're able to bridge that divide a little bit. But there is money, and I just don't have it in front of me. I know that to be the case on outside counsel.
Okay, and to be clear, is it your intent then that money would be able to be used at the discretion of the council if we have a question about whatever the issue may be, because of a conflict? Obviously, that's where that situation would arise. Right. Otherwise, the charter clearly indicates that the solicitor is the counsel for the city. But where there's a conflict, is the intent that money would be able to be used at the city council's discretion?
In short, yes, but I want to make clear, as I've said consistently, defining what the conflict is important, that we're working collaboratively, and I have with the president, and we'll work together. But we felt it was important recognizing, we recognized that need and respect and supported it, put the money in, and some details may have to be worked out, but I have no doubt we'll figure that out.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I think, as you know, my thought is that 25,000 is probably a little on the low side, maybe significantly on the low side. But if that's what it is, and it's in there at the council's discretion, then I'll take it. It's improvement, and we'll go from there.
I'd say, just Mr. President, to be fair, I understand. And typically, we have to come back for outside counsel for general city stuff. Once we get over, what is conflict, if anything's needed for conflict that fits those parameters, more money is needed for me, as long as I'm able to support those efforts, because it's kind of a moving target. Not exactly snow emergency, but kind of a moving target. I just don't know.
I appreciate that, and I agree with that. I think, to the extent that the city council has a discretionary fund that's available for a council to answer questions where there might be a conflict, and then if it becomes clear that there is a conflict, as you said, then a further requisition, amount can be appropriate amount can be determined at that time. But I think that if that's the intent of this and that's how it's in the budget, then I'm quite content with that. I appreciate your clarifying that.
And just Mr. President, because I want to give credit to President McLaughlin advocating, as you all have, advocating for that need. And that there'll be an opportunity, I think, in Leach, and whether this ends up in the charter process, which I won't be here after, but I want to support that. If there's an opportunity, how we formalize things, I think we have this runway to at least start that conversation with. I agreed with the necessity of that, and that's why we put the money in here, but understand that we may come up with, there may be suggestions or recommendations from the president and the council that how to refine that. I just don't have all those answers, but we didn't want to delay it further.
Okay, I agree. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. And if I could comment on this just very quickly and acknowledge that I know, Mr. Mayor, as you're leaving, you're thinking about how to leave the situation better as you depart. And that is something that I think about, regardless of being president or being a city council in general, just leaving things better than the way I found it. And I think that there are several appropriations that you've made that are going to leave the city council better for the next term, for the next generation of councilors. We do have in the budget money for a legislative aide, an assistant to help us with our legislative matters committee. There will be money for the planning for the land use committee to help us do zoning changes as we see fit. And there's several other things that I just think are going to leave things better off. But I think they're all game changers, so things that are going to make things better for the city and for us as councilors. I did speak to the city about this $25,000 for legal services, and it seemed to me like it was more about specifically very specific litigation issues that are currently at work that money has already been appropriated for in the past. So I'm concerned that, like, I feel like the legal services would be the big game changer for us to be able to go to outside counsel when necessary and have that ability. I think it would be possibly the first in the Commonwealth. And I know that other cities in the Commonwealth are looking at Somerville on this issue in particular. And I just don't feel like what we have in the budget right now is the game changer that I'd like to see. So I just want to state that I am very grateful for the many things in this budget that will benefit us directly and benefit the community. But I would love to come to a resolution on it this budget season so that people feel like they have appropriate representation.
Through you, Mr. President, I agree. And you have, I'll say it to you, as I said to you, I'll say by full commitment to work that all out. We want to leave it authentically in a better place, not just, we understand, whether 25 is enough, but make the intent authentic as possible. And I'm committed to work with all of you to hammer that out. But we wanted to move forward as you have urged us to, and the other councils are. And we can, I feel confident we'll get for that soon.
And I'll also add too that we have a new assistant city clerk position in the budget. So I appreciate that as well. Councilor Davis, did you have a comment on this?
Well, just thank you, Mr. President, through you to the mayor, or I guess to you, just a clarification, because I think I just heard two different things. And I recognize we'll get into this in the committee, but because the mayor's sitting here tonight he's here, and I'm not on the committee, so I have the chance to ask the question and clarify. Is that $25,000 specific for matters that already exist, or is it a fund that the council can use if we have questions that we want to ask of legal counsel?
It's ultimately, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the whole thing, but it's not meant to be as rigid as might be understandably perceived. So I have to look at that because that's not the intent. So as you have described what your focus is, and I agree, as I'm telling you publicly, and as the president has repeatedly advocated, as well as all of you, that's where we intend to be. And that's why I feel confident we'll work it out. If it's not clear, we'll make it clearer. If we want to do this, it's either do it the right way or don't do it at all. So, so I'm a little, again, I think best in committee, but it's not intended to be rigid. I don't think Matt is already there. I think we need, obviously, if there's something ongoing, we'll have to support that financially. And ongoing matters alone could eat $25,000 in a flick of a dime, of a pen. I think we know that. So I'm fully committed to make sure that's clear and where that discretion lies, and how there'll be a check and balance, much like if the mayor or any mayor now in the future seeks outside funding for outside counsel. I really feel confident we'll work through this and to fund it appropriately. No matter what we fund, it'll be seated. Hopefully we won't need more money, but in many cases we do on the outside counsel.
Okay,
So,
thank you. I appreciate that
I'm happy,
clarification.
and I'll be involved in this conversation, Mr. President, as well as Counselor. I'll
Thank
be
you, Mr.
tuned
Mayor.
in,
Thank
so
you, Fred.
I'll be paying attention to it, I promise.
All right, Mr. Mastroboni, did you have a comment before we moved on?
Sounds like we moved on. I'm happy to talk about it further in committee, talking about why we chose what we did, sort of unlocking that that object and how it's sort of difficult to budget these types of services. So we can have that conversation, and we're looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you. Councilor White.
Thank you, Mr. President. Very briefly to the mayor and your staff, thank you for the presentation. What really struck me was the conversion of new growth into substantial commercial development. And with the projects that are online that are going to be coming in, I don't think there is any administration in the past who has ever had such an anticipation of future commercial development coming in and all of the revenue. So, this is my last few months on the city council. So, that is one thing that has really struck me. And as the city moves forward, that's something that the future administration, future city councils, and residents of the city should really welcome, because it is an opportunity that we've never had in a transition that I'm aware of, and I've gone way back in my in my studies at Somerville for college and stuff. So I think that's really a positive. Now, the question I do have, and this is perhaps a technical one for Ed, the American Recovery Funds came in as a grant, which we approved. So now, once we've approved it as a grant, what ability, if at all, do we have over how those funds are expended, given their nature as a grant? And by us, I mean the city council.
Mr. Mastroboni?
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Come in.
Mr. Bean. There we go.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, it is a grant, as Councilor White did mention. So it is the executive department's discretion, but of course, as the mayor has said earlier in this presentation, that the money needs to be thought about in a very planful way, with community assessment of community needs and a planning process. So, as we have done throughout the experience with the CARES Act and FEMA, we've been regularly communicating with the Finance Committee and providing reports on spending. But I think, as the mayor is saying, we step back now and put together a planning process so we can truly assess the needs of the community and make sure that it's a very thoughtful approach in how this money is spent.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I just wanted folks to, because that was my understanding, once we approved it as a grant, it comes in basically, to the administration. So
Yes.
I assume in the next 6 months, it's not all going to be accounted for as far as how it's going to be spent, and that there will be latitude that'll be given to the incoming administration, and there'll also be, a new city council as well. So I'm just, inquiring basically about your intention about how much flexibility the next administration and the next city council is going to have with regards to these funds.
So if I also may add, it's an important question and point, because there's no other way to accept it, that money, but for a grant. So we didn't have a way to choose for it. So the public knows that if the city as a community didn't want 31 million, they was like, you take it or leave it. And again, this has never happened this way. That comes direct to the municipality. And by the way, they are still evolving some of the guidelines, but that is clear. It is a bright line. How we move forward, we want to be deliberate, engaged, thoughtful, and we don't want to drag on. We have needs here. We plan on outlining with the community the needs and making that commitment and investment. Some of the things, some of you're not allowed to do, but we will not utilize just to backfill city coffers and revenues. Just, I'm going to be candid. There's an impact on tax in the city when valuations go up and everything. A lot of people, the homeowners and the most wealthy homes, have the ability to pay. And you, Mr. Councilor White, help lead historic adoption of residential exemption that other communities can't even get a portion of. Some can't even get 10 or 15% passed. So we do a lot in this community led by the council and advocates and our administration to help alleviate the impact on taxpayers. We want to use this money wisely, as Ben Ewan Campen mentioned, Councilor Ewan Campen, get it out the door, people in fact make that commitment without, again, not missing that opportunity, not building any structural deficits down the road. Whatever we seed that might have an impact long term, we want to recover in the capital and the operating budget, a future administration and council. We want to make sure the runway is there to have the flexibility and resources to pick it up. So if we start a program or something with those ARPA funds, the money's gone after 2 years. We need to make sure we're thinking about taking the same approach we've done for the past 20 collectively. So you're all in a position, this community is in a position to carry that forward if that program is having the impact that we envisioned it to, and we want to continue it or increase it.
Yep, through the president, I appreciate that. I wasn't intimating that anybody pulled a fast one. That is the only way grants can be handled.
But I know what you were saying. No, I understand. No, I know what you're saying.
And I just wanted the councilors to also understand, in case there were any questions, that become a point in everyone's mind. And again, I'm not at all suggesting that the money go into the general fund to act as a massive subsidy for a budget or anything. No, I was just wondering the timeline as far as whether it was the intention of this administration to basically establish how all of those funds are going to be used, or whether there will be some for the next administration, or whether that's even firm enough at this point in time to even make a decision on it.
Well, wherever the planning takes us to you, Mr. President, is the best way to answer it. We have a lot of planning to do, and then some of those investments will carry over seeded, whether or not there's money left over. We're going to do, if the plan calls for a full expenditure in order to meet community now commit that, we're going to make that commitment. If some of it needs to evolve over a couple of years, then that's what we'll do. Whatever the plan. Remember, we have 2 years. I think there's a burn. It's a 2-year grant, maybe past one more after the next calendar year. So we will be engaged with the council on that. And then when we transition, especially with the next administration, as well as the community, obviously, I know Ed being one of the comment.
Mr. Bean, I think you might be muted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just rectified that. So just to clarify that the grant money must be obligated by the end of 2024, December 31st, 2024. Obligated means contractual obligations must be sent and actually spent by 2026. So this will certainly transcend this administration, and a lot of planning is required. So that's the and there's a good deal of flexibility in terms of the eligibility.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. I'm all set. I appreciate it from both the mayor and Mr. Bean.
All right, Councilor Strezza.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just had a quick question for Mr. Bean regarding the ARPA funds. There it is. Hi. Mr. President, through you to Mr. President, Mr. Bean. So with the ARPA grant funding, do you have in mind a public, I know that like a timeline established, even envision of when you can approach the city council and public about the process of dispersion?
We are undergoing an assessment right now, community assessment procedure right now. So I think we'll be rolling out that time frame, hopefully in the near future, give a better sense. There's a lot of, there has been a lot of guidance that have come down from either the feds or the local ANF, state local ANF. There seems to be a great deal of flexibility, but there's also, we need to hear some guidance in terms of how it's to be accounted for, and you know, a little bit more granular understanding of what we can specifically spend in very broad categories. So we're going through that. We're going through it. We're trying to set the structure up right.
If I may add to it for you, Mr. President, if you recall, we have engaged a consultant specializing to guide many municipalities in doing this. We're also, I mentioned earlier, alluded to it, and collaborating regionally with our partners on municipal, understand how they're approaching, answering their questions of what we're doing, as well as the staff you'll need to do this right. We want to get going. We have made no determination where the money should be spent. I've alluded to some areas that have come via the council, the community, that we're all well aware of. If we have the opportunity to address things now, we will not hesitate. So I submit this timetable is going to evolve at a very rapid pace as we move forward every week and every day.
That's encouraging, Mr. President, through you to Mr. Bean. Thank you for that elaboration, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Bean, 3 months, 6 months? I know. It's a preparation, but
we're very anxious to move forward. So we're trying to put the pieces in place right now. Not only assessing the community needs, but we also have to discuss how the money is going to be and a more effective way of getting the money out to disaffected residents and businesses as well. So I'm sure that, in the next few months, plans will be formulated. But again, as the mayor said, and we need to make a real effort to assess the needs of the community. That means a lot of outreach.
right,
And if I may just add, I'm sorry to interrupt, because the assessment, we have not just intuition, not just anecdotally, we have a real experience where that assessment should take us, right? But when we go back and report and share data with regional partners, different levels of government, state and federal government, it's important that we undergo a formal assessment and we document that. Also, guidance, as Ed Bean has mentioned, is still evolving, believe it or not, from the federal government. We have the money, and there are some questions, and I'll use just a general example. If we're trying to help a certain small business sector in our small business community, how does that match up against other small business assistance or something else the state's doing, so we can leverage that opportunity greatest and spread the money? Listen, we have one allotment of about 31 million. We'll get at least that, and maybe more based on the county disbursement. Seems like a lot of money, but we want to spread it as far as possible. And if we're targeted and we can leverage other resources that we know any sector of our community or families affected are getting to help double the positive impact or spread resources to the other areas we may have, we want to do it. So the assessment's going to be critical, that guidance, and we would like to get going yesterday. I think we just went right away without knowing. I know that's not what's being suggested. We'd miss a lot of opportunity.
And right, because from what I understand, that the ARPA guidelines are a little more flexible and not as stringent as the CARES grant, from what it seems like, or the guidelines.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. President, definitely not just as stringent as the CARES grant, but to get the money directly, we are not subjected to the rigid interpretation that Governor Baker's administration undertook. For example, the inability to get money to individual entrepreneurs and artists and so forth. There was one example. They remember, if you recall, they refused to adopt a section of the CARES Act that even the city of Boston adopted, because the CARES Act went to three entities: the Commonwealth, the city of Boston was their own entity, and Barnstable County. So we fell under the Commonwealth, but the city of Boston adopted a section, so they got more flexibility with the funds from the same source of funding. We're not subject to that rigidity any longer, but there's still a lot of questions, which is why when Ed Bean mentions guidelines are evolving, those guidelines may help us target other areas. But we're going to be coming back to you, the public. It's going to be, we mean when you say a very robust engagement process, but when we know things we can do right now, we're not going to wait months to do it. We'll tell you why we're doing it, because if there's a certain residents, our community that are more adversely impacted, or businesses, we want to help them right now.
Thank you. And if I may put in a really quick plug, that I echo our presidents with the fact that it would be lovely to have an ongoing free-flowing legal counsel for the city council. Thank you.
Loud and clear. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any further questions or comments before we move on to the schools? All right, hearing no further comment, let's see. Councilor Scott moves to waive the readings.